cómo lograr que haya o coordinación o reglas comunes para favorecer la innovación. Aumentar la inversión en innovación, como ya lo veíamos que comentaba José Luis, y generar instrumentos que fomenten la innovación. Yo creo que en este momento el país, el gobierno federal, está en una coyuntura que también puede aprovechar para la construcción de reglas de operación que faciliten que estos instrumentos y estos nuevos incentivos y estas nuevas reglas se puedan aplicar a lo largo de los próximos años, de manera tal que se permita y se logre el fortalecimiento del Sistema Nacional de Innovación. También es importante aquí el sistema de extensión. Este sistema de extensión tiene que estar pues orientado a la identificación y a la promoción de innovaciones en diferentes aspectos, como ya lo habíamos dicho, pero incluye la parte productiva, la parte organizativa, administrativa y de mercado, y tiene que haber una mayor vinculación con los productores. Debe haber también vinculación entre generación y uso del conocimiento. José Luis decía, es increíble la cantidad de papers que se realizan, pero no nos interesan los papers. Lo que es importante es que todo lo que se genere esté respondiendo a las necesidades, a las demandas, a los problemas de los productores, pero también que se vincule esta investigación con el desarrollo de capacidades y con la innovación y el extensionismo, porque es la única manera de lograr que se aplique de manera práctica en la solución de los problemas y que esto tenga un beneficio para el sector agroalimentario. Y finalmente, este sistema de extensión tiene que tener estrategias interdisciplinarias y transdisciplinarias. Hay especialistas en cada uno de los extensionistas. No podemos hacer un extensionista que sepa todo, pero sí podemos lograr, a partir de la articulación entre las diferentes disciplinas, que estos puedan tener una influencia fuerte en la aplicación de los conocimientos y en la innovación, específicamente en los proyectos para beneficio de los productores. Por último, ¿cuáles serían o cuáles son las aportaciones que está haciendo la red INNOVAGRO? Ya algunas se destacaron en la ceremonia de inauguración. La red de INNOVAGRO tiene actualmente 63 miembros y tenemos entre los miembros pues a diferentes tipos de instituciones. Todos ustedes son miembros de la red y la conocen a profundidad, pero lo que es importante es que este enfoque de sistemas nacionales de innovación, en donde participan diferentes actores que interactúan, intercambian conocimientos y experiencias, de alguna manera se reproduce con nuestra red, porque aquí participan diferentes actores y el intercambio que se genere entre ustedes pues va a favorecer la innovación. Actualmente tenemos 16 países en los que estamos participando, 14 de América Latina y Europa, participa España y Holanda. Nuestra primera aportación es esta primera conferencia o videoconferencia que estamos difundiendo a todos los países de la red sobre sistemas nacionales de innovación agroalimentaria, en donde estamos hablando de esta metodología de diagnóstico y del caso de México. La segunda aportación es esta guía metodológica para el diagnóstico de los sistemas nacionales de innovación. Y lo que queremos es que sea realmente un instrumento útil, un instrumento sistemático de análisis para los sistemas nacionales de innovación. Les decía yo que la vamos a aplicar en 2 países más este año y también este año vamos a trabajar en la Secretaría Ejecutiva en la elaboración de indicadores para el caso de México, en donde estaríamos avanzando en esta dificultad que nos hemos encontrado para la aplicación de la metodología que se planteaba en la guía, generando bases de datos que sean comparables también a nivel internacional. Y tenemos también como aportación este diplomado en gestión de innovación. La verdad es que hemos generado muchas expectativas, o tenemos, en lo personal tengo muchas expectativas de este diplomado. Esperamos que sea realmente útil para todas las instituciones de la red y que para México contribuya también a fortalecer pues, a cada una de las instituciones y a incidir en que la innovación pueda impulsarse de manera más fuerte y realmente tenga un impacto en el sector agroalimentario. Y bueno, a través del diplomado, hoy estamos haciendo una modalidad presencial, esta modalidad presencial que se dio abiertamente a todos los miembros de la red, de esta manera para que fuera más barata, más accesible a los diferentes países. Y de esta manera pues se van a identificar diferentes modalidades de innovación, se van a formular diferentes proyectos que cada uno de ustedes va a realizar. Vamos a trabajar sobre propiedad intelectual con un enfoque de Sistema Nacional de Innovación, y una cosa muy importante es que también destacó Mauricio Lastra en su intervención. Queremos contribuir de alguna manera a mitigar algunos vacíos que hemos encontrado en los sistemas, y entre ellos es la articulación entre transferencia, adopción y asimilación de conocimientos. Y finalmente también trabajaríamos en el desarrollo de indicadores y en el establecimiento de procesos de evaluación. Esta es la propuesta presencial, es nuestro primer diplomado, es punto de partida, y siempre después de un proceso como este vamos a tener pues acciones de mejora que nos permitan tener un diplomado mucho más sólido y más útil para todos nosotros. Nuestra siguiente propuesta es tener una propuesta de diplomado en línea. Aquí ya tenemos una persona, Gaby Camilla, que va a estar trabajando justo en lograr que este diplomado presencial podamos hacer la transferencia de él a un diplomado en línea, y con él pues llevarlo a todos los espacios que sean necesarios y de esta manera influir más en la red. Por último, como una de las grandes actividades que tiene la red a nivel internacional y anualmente, este es nuestro tercer año consecutivo que realizamos un programa de actividades común. Este año lo vamos a realizar en Colombia, en mayo. Los invitamos a todos ustedes para que asistan. También va a tener un enfoque de sistemas nacionales de innovación, y el programa consiste en un taller en gestión de la innovación en el sector agroalimentario. Vamos a realizar una ruta de innovación y vamos a conocer casos de éxito en Colombia. Y vamos a tener un seminario de innovación para la seguridad alimentaria y nutricional, en donde el enfoque es tanto por el lado de la oferta como por el lado de la demanda. Vamos a analizar innovaciones y sistemas para los productores y para los consumidores. Finalmente realizaríamos en Colombia nuestra asamblea de la red INNOVAGRO. Pues estas son las aportaciones de la red INNOVAGRO. Esperamos que este diplomado sea un instrumento útil para todos nosotros y también que nos permita pues seguir en este proceso de mejora continua. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos a la doctora, a la maestra Leticia de Shams. Valiosos serán sin duda también los comentarios que sobre el mismo trabajo nos compartirá ahora el doctor Krieg Poppe, de la Universidad de Wageningen, Holanda, quien dirigió un grupo de trabajo del Comité Permanente sobre Investigación Agrícola en la Unión Europea.
Buenos dias. That's my only Spanish. Good morning. Thank you very much for, first of all, inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here to lecture to the course. It's also a pleasure because I have been a couple of times in the south of Mexico, but it has been the last time I was in your beautiful Mexico City was in 1980 as a student. So it has changed a lot. Since that time I saw yesterday, and it's a pleasure to be here. I was asked to give some comments on the report, understandingly from a methodological point of view. I'm not an expert to check if everything has been captured in the report, but I found it a very interesting report. I would like to start with the point that it's of course important that countries review their agriculture knowledge and innovation system. This has been addressed by some of the previous speakers. The economy, and certainly your economy, develops and needs further growth. And altogether in this world, we have a challenge to feed 9 billion people in 2050 in a much more sustainable way than we do today. And that means we need innovation. And it's also excellent that I think the initiative like the Red INNOVAGRO has taken to play an important role to get such studies done. We can talk on farmers that have to innovate, but in the institutions where we work, in the universities, in the ministries, all the other organizations, we probably also have to innovate. So it's very good to look to the innovation in our own institutions, and I think it's important that the network has taken up the challenge to innovate in the innovation system itself. Because you know how it works with institutions, at least in our country, they get a little bit much too institutionalized. I think the report, and I'm not going through all the conclusions, but in the tradition, I think, of this university, it has a number of very courageous conclusions. A fragmented system, technology transfer is a problem, lack of coordination, better access to the system by international value chains than for the basic commodities or the traditional producers, and clear regions with rural development problems. The policy framework is so complete that it leads to a complex system, so you can be too complete. It's inefficient and ineffective, and there is a call for an in-depth policy review with a special attention to social and regional distributional aspects. I think that's the main conclusions that I took out of the study. And that gives me room for 5 comments. One on the methodology, which probably does not address so much the team, which has done fantastic work in describing the Mexican system, but also helps to think a little bit on revising the methodology now that you have some experience. Then my general impression of the study, and then some interpretation and some ideas perhaps that could help you in the discussions in Mexico, or can give you some ideas to work upon in your course. The methodology. I think it's very good to learn from an international exchange and to have a clear methodology. Farmers can learn a lot by benchmarking their results with other farmers. For bigger business, the stock market does the same. And I think for institutions and innovation systems, it's also very good to benchmark to other countries. The risk is, of course, that it turns into a large data gathering exercise with a lot of indicators, and do you then still, as an outsider, understand how it works? I think that the institutional part could focus a little bit more on the description of the incentives. We see a lot of the description of the institutes, but honestly I still not got an idea how people in this institute, in this university, are financed, or in some of the other institutes. Is it input finance? Is it competitive bidding for projects? What are exactly the incentives? And are they in line with the objectives of the people who pay? And I think, at least for an outsider, some case studies would have been instructive. There's always, of course, if you read something, you would like to have more work, but I've done quite extensive work in Europe, not only in this area, but recently, for instance, on cooperatives. And we always start out with asking countries to describe their system, but then also ask them for some cases. Can be cases that were very successful, cases where you said, what happened after that shock? How did the system react? Or have you just some best practices to report from your country where you say, well, there we did something which was very successful and could probably be beneficial in other situations. So as an outsider, I thought, well, it would be very attractive to have a chapter how the system works for the organic coffee or the fair trade with the small producers in the south of your country. We buy that coffee in the Netherlands, I learned from the studies we do in our institute that probably it not so much benefits only the income of the farmers in these coffee areas, but that it's a huge benefit in technology transfer, that know-how is transferred and that people are active in the certification schemes. So how does that system work, and how does it link with the education system you have, or the university system? Another one would, how does the system react to external shocks, which you could perhaps call wake-up calls, like the increase that we have seen in the maize prices a number of years ago, in relation or not in relation to biofuels, etc. Or how does the system work with well-known multinationals? Or I'm working myself at the moment also quite a lot in Europe in ICT, and I sometimes say to farmers, you have to look to Africa. That's an area where they do a lot with ICT in the long distances. A lot of African farmers walk around with a smartphone. They benchmark. In Kenya and Ethiopia, they do all their banking on their smartphone. They don't. They pay that way. And there are companies even in the Netherlands who provide them with data on the weather forecast. So I don't know what you do in Mexico and what Telmex is doing. I learned that they invest a lot of money in the Netherlands, which is very welcome. But it would be interesting to know how the system works. So some ideas, if you have to do some studies in the next weeks, which you can probably use. And well, one of the ideas that I would have for the methodology is also to ask for some case descriptions. Then my impressions from the study, a very interesting report that follows clearly the prescribed methodology, well written, an interesting overview of the sector and the innovation system. I think that in a number of cases, and that's probably not due to the authors, but to those that they interviewed, there's quite some linear thinking. The word technology transfer in itself is linear. There's nothing wrong with linear in some cases. If it comes to tractors or ICT or GMO, it comes from the outside and it is technology transfer. But we also know that a lot of research comes from good ideas by farmers, where we do not understand why it works, in that farm, and where the role of science is to make that thing that farmers do, make it understandable and make it more generic, and to use it in other cases. That's also a role of science. It's not only, with all respect to my colleagues, the professors who have the best ideas. They are also there in practice. There's another risk that, there's another point I think that some attention could be paid to players in the business. There is quite a lot of attention, I think, certainly compared to the past, to the private sector, but strangely not to banks in the report or to capital, or I overlooked it. But if it comes to innovation, there's a lot of talk on venture capital, seed money, business angels, micro credit, whatever, and that's not in the methodology, I think. There's also a little bit of technical bias. There's, I think, a lot of innovation in trade, in marketing, in retail. Think about the introduction of cold chains in the retail, where you freeze things and have refrigerators, which is, by the way, technical. But we tend to think a lot with innovation on technical things. But there's also, take the fair trade issue, that's the certification. That's not technical. That's an organizational invention. You could ask the same on players in infrastructure, ports, roads, ICT, education. I think traditionally a lot of the regional development in a lot of countries in the world has come from the government providing good infrastructure and good education. Then sustainability was mentioned by Dr. Solier this morning, I think is very important, but in the programs of a lot of the players, it does not seem to be a very large issue. pesticides. Water, I think, will become a very big issue if it is not already a big issue in your country. Think about climate change. Social innovation, I come back to that. And some foreign aspects. If I think about Mexico, then some of the PhDs are in Cornell or in Purdue, and there's nothing on relation with that type of, what we call in Europe sometimes a brain drain from Europe to the US. That must be an issue here, and the same is for migrant labor. There's a lot of migrant labor between your country and the US, and these people have a lot of contacts. We see the same in the Netherlands and Poland. You also have migrant labor, and these people take ideas back home and tell them to the family. So that's a knowledge chain, and if it does not exist, there is an interesting case story about it, why it does not exist. In my lecture later today, I will come to this list of different functions. The report claims that different functions are all there. That is, I think, true on what is done in the system. If you look to the performance of innovation systems, I like to use this list, which was once dreamed up by a Dutch colleague, Professor Marco Heckert in Utrecht, who said if you have a very good system, it performs 7 functions. There's knowledge development and diffusion, and I tick that off as being green. That's clearly here the case. There is an influence on the direction of search. The country knows where it's heading. There is an identification of opportunities in a good system. And I think with some of the examples given here, that's also the case in Mexico. Then the third one, that's more unclear to me. There is entrepreneurial experimentation. So people in the business start to experiment. The innovation is also experimentation. And they are able to manage the risk and the uncertainty that goes with the innovation. Some people claim that what a manager does with innovation is not only risk-taking, but the most activity is bringing down the risk as quick as possible to a normal business risk. And it's not so clear from the study that I read in how far the system helps entrepreneurs with that aspect. Then there is market formation. That's clearly the case. I talked already on organic markets, where you the international fruit and vegetable markets, the avocado, the dips, all that type of things. I think where Mexico has made an enormous progress. Resource mobilization. Are we able as a system, as a sector, to attract resources, capital, bright people? That type of things, and it's partly the case. I think you see it in research with the number of PhDs in the report, probably not so much in outreach in the private service providers, due perhaps also to the governance problem. Legitimation. Are we proud in Mexico on the system? Are we proud on agriculture and the food business? On some parts you probably are, on others not so clear. And then the development of positive externalities are the things that we learn in some parts of the system. Are they also useful for other parts? Do you have the effect of what we economists tend to label as positive externalities, thick labor markets, specialized functions, for instance, that type of things. Do they occur? Do you, or is this a question mark? If I reinterpret the main findings, and then I come a little bit on perhaps what you have to do in the next year in Mexico, then I have the impression that research seems to be a small activity. It could be that there is more in the States and in the university system, in education in the States. And I mean your Mexican states, not the United States. But it seems at least that it does fine in academic performance. There is a clear problem with the professional service providers in outreach, and it seems from the report that the governance system is a problem there. Personally, I don't think, but economists like me like competition, that the problem is with the fact that it's private. But the incentive system is probably, and the quality management system is below what you would like it to see. Then there is a clear problem that the linkages between research and this professional service providers are nearly non-existent. I think the complaint aired by the previous speakers that researchers mainly write papers for the journals, that's a big issue in Europe too at the moment too. I'm in a committee of the European Commission, and we have to come up with other performance criteria for researchers. So that's not only with you, but linkages should be there anyway, I think. I think there are a lot of programming activities, but it seems that there is some inadequate planning processes, or there are wrong incentive systems. For instance, some things are too much focused on 1 year instead of research programs or extension programs of 4 or 5 years. You cannot do a lot, even not in extension within 1 year, I think. And not enough focused on innovation, and not even on technology transfer. And not very successful, I think, in stressing the public issues. It does well in the private issues, but not so much in sustainability issues in rural development. And that lets me thinking, what future would you like to see? And it's you who are going to decide upon that, not me. But if I look from abroad to Mexico, I think development goes hand in hand with more investment in science and R&D. If a country becomes richer, it invests and has more capacity to invest in science and in research and development, and it's of course always also the other way around. Because you invest in research and development, you get the wheel flying. That gets the car on the road. So this process has to be strengthened, I think. Same point, if you develop a country, you see more income disparities all over the world. And that creates a need to solve social issues, issues of rural development, between the rich cities and the richer areas, and those who are more inland, more backwards, and have problems because they don't have the infrastructure or the natural resources to develop as fast as the others. And that's a social problem that every country has to solve in some way, and their rural development and tools for social innovation can help. But it asks for investments. Then, of course, there is the climate change issue and the sustainability issue. I already mentioned water.